Hey friends, welcome to my new channel. Welcome to the first video on my new channel, which is one of my favorite videos to make for the entire year. And that video is my favorite books of 2021. So let's hop in to my favorite books. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to my channel. Welcome all of you to my new channel. I know some of you have been watching my videos for a while, so I just welcome you back. But I know some of you are new, so welcome. I'm Angie. I love to read books. And so, like I said, this video is on my favorite books of this past year. So I actually did put them in order, which is very challenging. And I was able to narrow them down to my top 10 books. And I actually only have about 5 of them in my possession to show you because I tend to lend out books that are my favorites really quickly. I think my sister has most of them. So starting at number 10 is Final Girls by Riley Sager. This book was his debut novel and it just knocked it out of the park, for me at least. I actually did do a reading vlog. I'll post it up here where I read through all of the Riley Sager books I hadn't read thus far, and then I ranked them in the order of my favorites, and Final Girls was my favorite. So it is about a group of final girls, and final girl is a term given to someone who has survived like a mass killing. So it's kind of the last one standing. And then in this book, it seems like someone is trying to pick them off. Someone is trying to kill the final girls. And we follow one girl in particular. I don't have my book, so I forgot her name, but I loved her character. I felt like her character was really real in the sense that she was just trying to get on with her life. She had a boyfriend. She had like this cooking blog that she really loved. And so she was just trying to like move on with her life. And you could just tell she wanted that so badly, but she couldn't, because she couldn't remember the day in question. She couldn't remember what happened to her when all of her friends were killed. And then things start happening in this book. And I won't say any more than that because it's a thriller and it's a fantastic thriller. And I was really along for the ride on this one the whole way. I think I honestly read this book in like 2 days, which is fast for me. I usually can't spend that much time reading, but it literally drew me in and I had to know what happened to her and what was currently happening to her. It was so good. So I recommend that book. I know it's like an oldie. It's definitely not a new book. But if you haven't read any Riley Sager, I would start with Final Girls. It was really, really fun. Next on my list, so number 9, is We Are the Brennans. I think it's by Tracey Lange. Again, I don't have the book with me. I lent it out. Another fantastic book. And this is a contemporary book. Straight up contemporary, which usually isn't a genre I lean towards, but I really liked this book. So this was about a family. It's about an Irish family, and the book is told from the main perspective of the girl Sunday. But it does switch perspectives throughout the book to all the different siblings and even the dad, I believe. So it centers around this big family, and a lot of them still live together and they run a business together, so they're very much in each other's lives. And Sunday actually left town really unexpectedly. She kind of cut ties with her family and it really resulted in some like broken relationships. And we don't know exactly what happened or what caused her to do that at the beginning. We learn about it later. And I felt like that answered a lot of questions as to her behavior, because not only her, but also her brothers are very flawed. They are very flawed characters who make some poor decisions, but I was really drawn in. And I feel like I'm not often drawn into books where people just make bad decisions, but I felt like some of these bad decisions were really realistic. Like I could see how somebody could enter that kind of an emotional state or could approach that situation in a certain way to make these bad decisions. But what I really loved about this book was the family togetherness, was just how close they were, how they worked out problems, how they didn't give up on each other even if they were hurt by each other. Oh, it was just so good. I really enjoyed this book. So I would highly recommend picking that up, especially if you're in the mood for like a contemporary family drama sort of book. So my next book, so number 8 on my list, is Hollowpox, which I'll put up here because I also don't own this book. I need to buy them, but I listened to it on audio and it is a fantastic audiobook. Actually, all of them are, because this is the 3rd book in the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend, and they're all so good. So they're kind of a middle grade fantasy series that's currently being written. So there's only 3 books out, but I think there is intended to be many, many more. And it is a fun world. The world of Nevermore is just very entertaining. It has Harry Potter vibes, but it's very different in a lot of senses. So it's definitely its own story. But you have the main character of Morgan Crow, who in the first book is really trying to find herself and has stumbled into the world of Nevermore, and most specifically the Wondrous Society, which is a group of kind of magical people in different ways. And it's a school. Oh, it's hard to describe. I don't want to give it away too much. But what I really like about the whole series, and definitely the third one, Hollowpox, is just the character of Morgan Crow. I feel like she really came into her own in this book in particular, where she started kind of feeling stronger and more confident. And that was just really fun to see. And then the other characters, some of her classmates and her mentors, like their characters also definitely seemed to deepen, and you learned more about them. And you start to question a little bit of the underlying plot. Like some of the things that were set up in the first book, you're like, well, maybe it's not as simple as it was set out to be, which makes the series so much more interesting. So, sorry if that was confusing and a little all over the place, but I really, really enjoyed this book. Okay, the next book that was just such an immersive ride was this one, which I actually have a copy of, and it's The Devil and the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. Now, he is the author of The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Such a twisty book, which people either love or hate. I know that. And I really loved that book. And I really loved this book. It was just really fun. Like, he is an author that is just hard to nail down. I can't decide if I would put him in like thriller, mystery, or like historical fiction, historical thriller, or like science fiction. It's just like he's kind of all over the place, which I think is what I really like about him. I'm just not sure where he's going to land, and so he always keeps me guessing. And in this book in particular, it's a story about a mystery on a boat. So there's this ship that seems to be haunted. So it starts out with this character, I forget his name. He's a famous detective, Samuel Pipps. And he is, for some reason, been sentenced to a serious crime, and he's like on his way back to Amsterdam, and he's being transported on this ship. But what starts happening is the ship starts to have weird things, scary things start to happen, and you just don't know what's going on, and they're stranded. Are they really being haunted by like a demon? What is going on? So I don't want to say too much because it is definitely a twisty sort of book, but it has great characters as well. I spent the whole time thinking, did this person do it? Is this person involved? Because it's a closed door mystery in a way, because it's on a boat. And so I really like those kinds of mysteries, because then I know that the answer is within my grasp. I think I'm more inclined to try and guess on these kinds of mysteries than others, but I didn't guess. I didn't guess what was happening in this book. It was a really, really fun book. So, The Devil in the Dark Water. If you haven't picked it up yet, highly recommend it. All right, so my next book, number 6, I think I'm at. Oh, I loved this book. I love this book. I buddy read this with my friend Emily over at Novell Novels. I will link her below. She has a great channel. But we read this book. It's called The Other Einstein by Marie Benedict, which I have been wanting to pick up more of her books after reading this. And so I will. But this book, oh, I loved it. Okay, so it's about Albert Einstein's first wife. Her name was Mitza, and she was a scientist. She was a gifted female scientist, and we're talking 1896. So this is not a time for female scientists. It's also not a time for female scientists in the hard sciences. So you're talking like physics and mathematics. But she was just really gifted and really smart. And so she was a classmate of Albert Einstein. And this book talks about how they fell in love, how they worked together, and then it gets into their marriage, and then it gets into some stuff that is of speculation in the scientific community, the speculation of like, was everything that Albert Einstein put together, especially his theory on like relativity, was that all him? Or did he have help from her because she was so smart and that was more her field than his, but she wasn't able to finish her degree, I believe, because she got pregnant. And so the question is, well, was that her idea? Did science kind of steal that from her, or did Albert Einstein steal that from her? So I found just the portrayal of their life so very interesting, even though this is historical fiction. This is not like a memoir of any kind. And so the author, I'm sure, took some liberty as to filling in some gaps on what it would have been like to be married to Albert Einstein. But it was, I felt like a really powerful book. And I loved the science. I don't think the science was unapproachable. Being that I have a PhD in science, I just really enjoyed it. I didn't have a PhD in any physics or math, but I could still appreciate kind of this scientific approach and how things are done. So I just love this book so much. So definitely a favorite for this year. Okay, So this book I just finished a couple weeks ago and I loved it. I flew through it. It was just the perfect read for the time I read it, and it is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. So this is a young adult, I believe, a young adult fantasy book that was just so much fun. And I recommended this in my cold and snowy reads recommendations because this time of year is just the perfect time to read it. So it is set in kind of historical Russia. It doesn't really go into too much of that, but you know that's the culture that these characters are in. And so this is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, but the author did just such a great job of retelling this story. So it starts out with Miriam, I think. Yep, Miriam is her name. So she's the daughter of a moneylender. So a man who lends out money and then collects interest back on his money. But her dad was a terrible moneylender. He just didn't hold people accountable. He was like, oh, it's not a big deal. So they were really poor until she decided to kind of take the reins and take over the business and demand the money back from people. And then she found she was really good at it. And in the process, she kind of made this boast in regards to like how good she was at getting money. At one point, she said that she could turn silver into gold, sort of idea. But what I haven't mentioned yet is that she lives in a town that borders up against the Winter Kingdom, I believe it was called. It's like a land of fae where there's a winter king and like winter people who are just strong and can withstand the cold and all of this. And they are called the Stark. And she gains the interest of the king because she boasted that she could turn silver into gold, which gold is what he wants, and he has lots of silver. So she gets kind of sucked into his world. And I won't explain exactly how, but it's so much fun. I really just couldn't put this book down. It was just a really fun ride. It definitely has YA elements, but not in any sort of annoying way. Her character was just so strong and so much fun. So I really enjoyed this book. And so the next book on my list, I think number 4, is The Nature of Fragile Things by Susan Meissner. So this was her latest book this year. Oh, I highly enjoyed it. So last year I read As Bright as Heaven, and it was my favorite book of the year. And so I have picked up a number of Susan Meissner books since then, and I have really enjoyed most of them. This one and Secrets of a Charmed Life I read this year and I really liked. But this I liked better. I really loved the setting and the characters, which again is what I liked about As Bright as Heaven. But in this book, The Nature of Fragile Things, it has to do with the San Francisco earthquake and this family. And so there was a main character, I forget her name and I don't have the book, but she moved across country and married a man she didn't know, and she agreed to help him raise his child, which seems a bit strange, but when you dive into her character, you definitely understand why. And there's a lot of strength in her character. So I really enjoyed her character. And then the mystery of kind of her husband. Why does he even want to marry someone he doesn't even know to help him raise his child? Like, what's going on there? Something strange. And so there's sort of this mystery going on there. And as things were getting worked out, the earthquake hit. And I feel like that was my favorite part of this book, is just that she did such an excellent job, kind of like she did with the Spanish flu, of drawing you into what it would feel like to be in this tragedy. I felt very transported into that, almost like you feel the panic, you feel the smoke, you feel like the shaking. And Susan Meissner just did an amazing job of that. So I loved that. But like I said, I also really enjoyed the characters and kind of what was going on there. And there was a little bit more mystery in this book than, say, As Bright as Heaven. And so that was really fun. And there's definitely some tension as to like, what are they going to do now? So good. Such a good book. I highly recommend that one. Okay, now we're to my top 3, which, it was so hard to pick between these ones, but I did. So my third favorite book of the year was Codename Helen by Ariel Lawhon. I listened to this book at the beginning of the year. Listened to the audiobook, which I really recommend their audiobook. I really enjoyed it. This book was about a woman spy in World War II. And what I loved about this book is it jumped back and forth in time. So it started out later in the war as she's like jumping out of an airplane into enemy territory and she has a mission sort of idea. So you're like, wow, she's really a badass. But then it hops back to before the war and you learn a little bit more about her. You learn about what's driving her. You learn about some of the events that happened to her that made her so strong when it came to having to be tough during the war. And so you learn some of that stuff. You learn about her relationship with her husband. And then you follow along as she's making the decision to become a spy, to take part in the war, and know that that puts herself and her husband at risk. And I just really felt it. I just really connected with her character. I connected with the story. There's some parts of it that's just like, I mean, it is a World War II book, but it just ripped my heart out to even think that some of these things could have happened. And what is really cool about this book is it was based off a real person. Now, again, this was a historical fiction book. So this wasn't a nonfiction book. There is actually a nonfiction book written about this woman, which I'll link below if I find it. And so the author was definitely able to take her story and make it flow a little bit better and make it more interesting. But the bones of it were a real person, which always just fascinates me. So, codename Helen. Loved it, loved it, loved it. All right, so my second favorite book of the year, I actually did a vlog on, and that was this book, Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon. Oh, guys, this was such a good book. I am still thinking about this book. So it is about the Oregon Trail. So people who are trying to move west and find a better life. So you're talking like covered wagons, wagon trail, all that stuff. So it follows this girl, Naomi, and she's with her family, and they are traveling west. And they actually have a guide who is half Pawnee, I think. So he's half Indian. And he's their guide for getting to the next like outpost and things like that. And it's so good. It actually, the story starts with a chapter where it talks about the wagon train being attacked by Native Americans. And there's something going on there. And you don't know why and you don't know what happened, but you know it was something bad. And so you're already kind of off to a very anxious start with this book, but then it goes back in time and you start to get to know the characters. You get to know her, you get to know her family, and you get to follow the romance as it starts to develop between her and John, their guide. Oh, I don't want to say too much other than the fact that it really drew me in, and just her family and how she loved her brothers so well, and we're fighting for them and looking for them, and there's just so much going on in this story that you just can't help but get attached to the characters and just worry about them. And oh my gosh, it was such a good book, such a good book. I highly enjoyed it. I'm not usually drawn to this time frame in history, but it was really well written, so I couldn't recommend this higher. Okay, as for my favorite book, which was hard. It was hard to kind of pick between these three here. But the one that has stuck with me that I just thought was so clever and so good was this book. So it's And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Not a new book, a very old book. But there's a reason that people think of this book when they think of Agatha Christie, or at least I did. I know I can think of a handful of her books, and this is one of those. And I knew that I wanted to start here because of the general idea of the book. And the general idea of the book is that same idea. It's that closed door mystery, that there's this group of people that were like invited to this island. You don't know why, you don't know what their backstory is. And then they get cut off. Like they can't go back to the mainland. They're stuck. And then bad things start happening. And you only have a handful of people to work with on who did it. Why are people dying? Who's killing who? What are some of the backstories? And I just thought it was so magnificently written. Like it was, I can't think of a better word. I was just floored by how the story drew me in. Like I was anxious from the start. Like I was like, oh, bad things are going to happen. And then they'd give you little clues, and you'd start to think it was somebody. And then you start to think it was somebody else. And it was so entertaining. So entertaining. And the end, okay, for anybody who's read this book, the end is the best part of this book. It was so good. It was so good. It's one of those, like, I can't get into it, obviously, because I want you to read the book. But if you do read this book, or if you have read this book, reach out to me. Let me know what you think, because the end was just so good. Top book, favorite book of 2021. So anyway, those are my favorite books of the year, hands down. So good. I would love to know your favorite book. Please share that down below. I'd also love to know if you have read any of these books. Even if you have other opinions on them, let me know down below. I would just love to talk about any of these books. They have been so much fun, and they're some really good memories of the year for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the first video on my new book channel. So that is what I have for this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel as I try and get this new book channel off the ground. I really appreciate all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. All right, take care.